Hello, everyone. We are back with another talk by Ankur Razdan, Vice President at xLabs Virtusa. He'll be talking about digital sandbox and how it has been helping banks and regulators strengthen innovation in financial services. So, over to you, Ankur.
Thank you very much, Jagrati. Hi, everyone. First of all, it's a pleasure speaking here at the FinTech Bridge. Uh, what is important, I believe, in this session is that we understand what a digital sandbox really is, and there's a lot of times we get confused between a regulatory sandbox versus a digital sandbox, especially when we talk about digital sandboxes in the context of regulators, right? So how banks and regulators are strengthening innovation in the financial sector by using digital sandboxes. I would like to again differentiate between a regulatory and a digital sandbox as we go ahead into the presentation. Uh, but before we go there, I would like to just set the context by saying, what has this new normal taught us? And we all know what this new normal is really about, right? We've seen this for the past so many months now. And as organizations are trying to respond and then recover from what they've seen over the past few months, there are certain learnings that have come to the forefront, right? Whether we are a financial institution, whether we are a fintech, whether we are a regulatory body, you can take those words that are there on the right and kind of mold them to the needs and the responsiveness that these organizations need to provide. For example, if I were to take the hat of a financial institution and say, okay, I need to be more digitally responsive, I think everybody would agree to that, right? We've seen such a shifting demand when it comes to digital experiences from the consumers that it's imperative for financial institutions to be digitally responsive, and agility to be able to respond, which means you need to be able to really understand what the market is talking to you about, what are the shifting consumer behaviors that we are talking about, and then if you understand that, you need to have the speed to be able to deliver solutions to the market with that particular speed so that it's fast enough for consumers to be able to utilize those services and products. On the other hand, of course, when it comes to the operations as an institution, as a financial institution, I need to be operationally resilient, right? In these times, it could very well mean I need to have better risk management capabilities, or I need to have better process efficiencies in place so as to be able to tackle some of these uncertainties that we are seeing in the market. And as you move down below, we've seen in the context of what's happening these days, it's important for organizations to collaborate. And that's I think the bottom line when it comes to be able to develop new products and services for the market, digital products and services for the market. So how do you do that? You have to be easy to partner with, easy to collaborate with. There are so many options when it comes to competition. And therefore, unless you are able to provide an ability to smoothly collaborate with yourself, unless you are on an environment where you are able to provide frictionless journeys to collaborate with each other, you are not really going to have that easy to partner with kind of a forum, right? All right. So if I were to take the example of a regulatory, scenario and take all the three words once again, as a regulator, I need to be digitally responsive. I need to be able to understand what the market is really doing. How do I really protect the interests of the consumer when the market is moving more digitally, right? Also, there's so many new technologies that are coming to the forefront. So how do I take those technologies and make sure I understand those technologies as well? And then when it comes to operational resilience, I think from a financial regulator standpoint, it's quite evident, right? Better stress testing frameworks, better risk management frameworks, operational resilience within the marketplace and the ecosystem. And finally, how do I make the entire ecosystem something where people can easily collaborate? Because it's all about improving competition. It's about creating a level playing field for all the market participants primarily. So whether I look at it from whichever perspective, these are, I think, the three things that that as institutions, as ecosystem participants, we need to really understand. And how does it really convert into a common innovation infrastructure. We've seen so many things happening in the market, right? There have been emerging disruptive technologies, financial institutions, regulators, FinTechs trying out, experimenting with a lot of emerging disruptive technologies. On the other hand, the consumer behaviors have been shifting, and these consumer behaviors have been shifting primarily either because, it's not just because of what we've seen happening in the last few months. We all knew that the customer behavior is shifting towards digital, right? The only thing I would say these last few months they've kind of accelerated that shift towards digital, right? We've seen 200% increase in the United States in a single month for digital products and services in financial services, right? So it's accelerated that entire effort. And at the same time, there are so many uncertainties that we face in the new normal, right? We don't really know how the macroeconomic conditions are going to come out, within the country, how the country is going to respond to the new normal. And even organizations, as organizations try to recover, they may want to rescale, they may want to, reinvent some of their business models. While there are some organizations that may just want to retire some applications, some services, some products that they don't think necessary in the future. While we play with all these uncertainties on one hand, how do these uncertainties really get converted to what we need as outcomes, which is the resilience, which is the speed, agility, and an ability to collaborate with market participants as well? And that's where I believe the common innovation evaluation infrastructure, which I've kind of kept in the middle, is the key to getting everything together. And there are many participants to this. Not just financial institutions, not just regulators, the FinTechs, the third-party service providers, developer ecosystems, everyone who can participate, experts, market leaders within that innovation infrastructure that allow you to validate technologies, that allow you to work collaboratively and build point of views for the industry solutions that you're trying to really do. And that common innovation evaluation infrastructure is what really a digital sandbox is, right? It's basically an ability for organizations to expose data, the processes, functionalities, work collaboratively within the ecosystem. As a financial institution, I would like to work with my clients, I would like to work with my customers, my partners, the regulators, everyone to build new products in the digital economy, new services in the digital economy, right? And this, as I did mention earlier also, is not a regulatory sandbox. The reasons for a regulatory sandbox are completely different. The regulatory sandbox comes into place when the product is already innovated. The product, it's been developed. All you need to do is to kind of pilot it. It's ready for piloting with actual people, actual consumers. While as a digital sandbox is something that where you're trying to create solution, trying to create a product, work with ecosystem participants to build that. And that's why the enablers that you see on the right for a digital sandbox would essentially be very different to the kind of enablers that you will see for a regulatory sandbox, right? For a digital sandbox to work, you need to have an API marketplace. You need to have an ability where people can come together, community forums, collaborate with each other, right? And one of the most important aspects that I see in a digital sandbox is the synthetic data assets. And that's where most of your experimentation, most of your solution is actually going to be created, right? That's the synthetic data assets, which I believe is an important element of what organizations need as a part of the digital sandbox, right? An integrated development environment where people can come and mash up solutions together, right? And these could be API-based solutions, these could be AI-based solutions, and a lot of different varieties, yeah? As a regulator, as a central bank, as a body that is observing this entire thing, a digital sandbox should also provide an ability to monitor, an ability to observe, an observation deck maybe wherein organizations are collaborating, building solutions, but the regulators and the central banks and the governing bodies are really able to look at this entire thing and say, okay, fine. This is something that is really interesting and something that I believe will make sense for consumer protection in the future, and therefore something that we would like to form a policy guideline around. And that's what really brings the regulators also into the fray when it comes to a digital sandbox primarily. We have seen a lot of examples, and when I use the words regulators and central banks here, I'm using the terminologies a little loosely here. Actually, I'm also talking about industry bodies, government organizations, world bodies, really coming together to build all of these digital ecosystems, right? And we've seen examples closer to home in Singapore, in India. For example, the API exchange or the APEX that has been founded by the Monetary Authority of Singapore in collaboration with one of the World Bank sister concerns, which is IFC and the ASEAN Bankers Association. The last count I know, it had more than 300 FinTechs, more than 50 financial institutions working together to build a collaborative ecosystem, driving economic growth, driving financial inclusion, driving objectives such as growth of the FinTech ecosystem in itself, right? And creating a marketplace, creating an market infrastructure for innovation primarily. Similar concepts, being utilized by the Mumbai FinTech Hub in India. We've seen, slightly far away from home, the Financial Conduct Authority in the UK very, very recently started the digital sandbox pilot. And we all know they already have a regulatory sandbox. They were, in fact, the forerunners when it comes to creating a regulatory sandbox. So does the Monetary Authority of Singapore. But the digital sandbox really complements the regulatory sandbox. I mean, it is probably a step behind the regulatory sandbox, although it's being launched later. It's a step where you're innovating, you're testing out, and once your product is ready, maybe that's the time you go to the regulatory sandbox and say, okay, now I'm ready to actually experiment with real consumers on this particular thing. So we've seen various examples of government bodies, organizations trying to come together and create these digital ecosystems with a very clear objectives, actually, right? I mean, they would like to promote competition. They would like to create a level playing field. They would like to democratize access to technology. On the other hand, the Financial Conduct Authority, for example, has very, very clearly come out and said that we would like to build this digital ecosystem to develop market resilience, right? We'd like industry to come together and develop COVID-19 specific use cases, solutions, and come together to build a resilient economy, a resilient infrastructure. And of course, as I did mention, things like financial inclusion, financial literacy, and specific examples that regulators would like to work on, digital identity, for example, maybe. And then it all boils down to be able to defining policy guidelines, looking at how these technologies really work, understanding the elements that go behind building such solutions, and therefore having a point of view on how this technology could be utilized within the financial sector and what guidelines need to be put in place if that has to happen primarily, right? With that, background, since some of the participants here are also FinTechs, I mean, one of the things that I really wanted to bring to the forefront is why should FinTechs really, get onto such kind of ecosystems, and why should FinTechs participate in such kind of ecosystems? I think some of the answers are very clear, but some of the answers are not so clear. The common and the most cited reasons being, okay, you get access to like a 50 odd financial institutions, you get access to an X amount of customers, and you can reduce your sales expenses. The legwork that you require to be going out to some sort of these customers is going to be much more if you are going to go around as a physical entity. However, reducing sales expenses is not really the only thing that I believe as FinTechs we should look at when we go to such kind of ecosystems. There are broader things that we need to keep in mind. I mean, collaboration and co-creation with peers, for example. I mean, solutions that you can build together, which will solve industry-specific issues. I mean, we've seen FinTechs which are great at certain areas of work, and therefore they need to come together, build larger solutions, work with peers, work with collaborators to expand the solutioning and the horizons. On the other hand, I think a lot of times these solutions and these ecosystems give you a lot of access to regulators, give you access to investors, which otherwise is difficult. So for example, if you have access to regulators and you are in a ecosystem where regulators are participating, it's easier for you to drive standardization. I think that's one of the key concerns most of the fintechs I've spoken to, right? In areas where there is no standardization, how do I drive standardization and work with regulators, get onto those forums, really participate actively and build point of views around that. Unfortunately, a few of these examples that I've been with, while there have been fintechs, they're probably looking at it from a sales channel point of view. I mean, it's more of also, I would suggest more of a channel wherein you can build point of views, you can lobby and work with regulators and investors together to create industry solutions primarily. And one of the last things that I think I wanted to for all of us to have a look at, there have been digital sandboxes, but any sandbox, any ecosystem is only as good as the activity that it is able to generate. I mean, you can have a lot of participants coming together and being on the ecosystem, but what's the activity that's being generated? What's the value that the ecosystem is being provided? If it's not happening, then at the end of the day, the ecosystem is going to die down sooner or later. Some of the points that I have put here are based on my own experience of working very closely with some ecosystems, right? What do we need? We really need real problem statements. I don't want to do a proof of concepts for the sake of doing proof of concepts. There have to be real problem statements by real institutions, whether they are regulators, whether they are financial institutions, or any other government body, but it has to be a real problem statement. And if it is a real problem statement, the solution providers need to be incentivized, right? I mean, nobody wants to work for free, and it's kind of become a fashion to not pay the fintechs, I believe, now. You have to incentivize the solution providers. You have to give them the incentive to solve your problem. And that's why some of the hackathons are quite good. And some of the hackathons, there's a lot of participation because there are prize money, there are visibility, and incentives could be of any form, but it has to be incentivized. And then some of the key concerns around IP, around being able to participate in an open ecosystem, but still still safeguard the intellectual property, still safeguard some of the contractual clauses. I think that's very, very important when it comes to solution providers who are actually putting out some of the solutions on an open ecosystem, but they're really concerned about how it's going to be utilized. And I've seen cases where some of these things have been misused as well in certain sandboxes. And then drive standardization. I think for fintechs, for not just fintechs, I think even for the financial ecosystem to really work, it's important that these digital sandboxes, which have a lot of these financial institutions, a lot of these fintechs working together, it's an important area where they should look at. How do you drive a standardization so that every fintech does not have to make 500 different changes when they work with 3 different financial institutions? On the other hand, the financial institutions do not get into a partnership that cannot be easily replaced, right? And risk management from their end is also very important. So I believe some of the things that a digital sandbox should really have for it to be successful, I've listed out here. And that's what I believe will make the difference when it comes to really helping innovate on a digital sandbox. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Ankur, for a wonderful session. Anyone with the question can post it up on the chat section or the question tab. Okay, there's a raise hand.
Hi, Ankur. This is Timana from Watchloan.
Hi, Timana.
Check your experience. Like, the RBI has launched the regulatory sandbox. IRDA, SEBI has followed up with that. But some of the fintechs are not welcome. If you have to just apply for that sandbox access, it's very, very tedious. I mean, is there any, like you spoke about collaboration, speaking up, talking to the regulator. Is there any way that fintech can make it very easy to access through some of the leaders? So Paytm can just get that access and give it to so many small fintechs who will keep innovating. Each one of us cannot go to the regulatory sandbox and get an access. It's a very, very big procedure out there. What has been your experience?
And I think that's a very good question, Timana. Thank you very much. And I think that's the construct I was really coming to when I said a regulatory sandbox versus a digital sandbox. I will come back to this example of the Financial Conduct Authority in the UK. They launched a regulatory sandbox long back. I think we all know they were the forerunners in a regulatory sandbox. And a regulatory sandbox has a specific purpose. You cannot accept any and all applications for a regulatory sandbox. There are certain criteria that you need to fulfill to be able to part of regulatory sandbox. You have to have solution that has been proven. You have to have the various criteria that these government organizations will really have, and rightly so. But still, the Financial Conduct Authority very, very recently launched a digital sandbox, and this is exactly the need that they wanted to fulfill. This is the white space that was coming up, saying that while there is a regulatory sandbox, and for quite some time, it was thought that fintech engagement is actually regulatory sandboxes, but it's not. A regulatory sandbox is a different purpose, which is why I am suggesting, and and typically most governments have done it the other way around. So they've kind of started the regulatory sandboxes, and then they are now looking at launching digital sandboxes, right? A digital sandbox, on the other hand, is what I'm talking about, wherein everyone is welcome, right? Mostly everyone is welcome. And if you see our example, even with an organization that I work very closely with in Singapore, the Apex platform, most fintechs are welcome, and most innovators are welcome. And it's an ecosystem where everybody can come together and collaborate together rather than having to apply over a tedious process and make sure you meet certain guidelines and principles. Most, even Mumbai FinTech Hub, I would say, I have not worked very closely with them, but I do understand, I'm sure they don't have very severe guidelines when it comes to onboarding as a participant, because it's not a regulatory environment. It's a sandbox environment. It's a digital sandbox where a lot of, the only problem that I see, Timana, is that as a fintech organizations, we don't really come together so much and voice our concerns in these ecosystems, because we believe that we may not really be heard. And I think some of these organizations do have advisory councils, and they do have some user groups that you can be a part of and raise your concerns. I believe that's what will really help, if that answers your question to me.
Yeah. Actually, we are trying to raise that through the FinTech Convergence Council in India and all that. But they're big, it's completely dominated by payment side guys, and it is dominated by digital lenders. The FinTech is not digital lending. FinTech is enabling the whole BFSI space, right?
Absolutely.
So the minute you become a digital lender, the innovation gets killed. But other small companies are constantly innovating and picking small problems and picking. When you pick up a problem, try to solve, you cannot fit into that regulatory, that framework. You won't fit in. We are finding it very difficult to bring these together.
Which is why I said, it's not the regulatory sandbox, but the digital sandbox. That's the answer.
But where is it available? In India, is it available?
No, not in India. In India, the Mumbai FinTech Hub is one that I am aware of.
Okay.
I very recently have not been in touch with them, so I don't know the kind of activity. But there are quite a few fintechs that I know who are a part of that ecosystem. And in Singapore, as I talked about, the Apex, there is one that has been very recently created in Malaysia. There was one that we heard a few conversations back, right, from the Malaysia, the FinTech Booster. So these are ecosystems that we need to really work with, I believe.
For a simple example, I'll tell you, for example, there is a DigiLocker, and it is providing X amount of data sources, each individual has got 15, 20 data and document about the individual. We've been asking them, why don't you launch it for MSME? They said, no, that is another regulatory piece, we have to get it clear. And for example, we are servicing Gramina Bank, the RRBs, regional rural banks in India. They cover about 10 crore farmers lending in a year. And they have a problem to access land records. And I'm telling the government, why don't you place it in one place where anybody can access? Then only the people can create innovations. They said, okay,
Right.
you have to deal with state government agri departments, or you have to deal with their digital sources. There are like 10 departments for each asset, like real estate, whether it's an agri land or a real estate. The revenue data comes from somewhere, registry comes from somewhere, EC comes from somewhere. It's like 1,000 sources to go. I mean, this has to come on a digital sandbox, if you say so.
Absolutely, and I think that's where we are moving to. I mean, we've seen a lot of that happening even in India, and I'm sure as the digital stack grows in India, things will come together over a period.
Yeah, thanks.